Hey y'all, what's happening? This is Healthy Happenings. I'm Dr. Lucille coming at you with our show today from NPTV, or should I say Natural Partners Full Script TV. On Healthy Happenings, once again, just to remember and remind you, what we talk about is what's happening. And today we're doing a deep dive into nitric oxide. And the best person I could think about to talk about this subject, this molecule, is Dr. Nathan Bryan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Dr. Lucille. Thanks for having me.
Call me Holly.
Holly, okay. Call me Nathan.
All right. Nathan and Holly are going at it, nitric oxide. So let's just get started. What is nitric oxide, and why should our listeners be concerned with it?
Yeah, it's quite timely, Holly, because I just returned from Oxford University where we held our 10th International Nitric Oxide meeting. So about 300 of the top nitric oxide scientists and researchers there. And so what we come away with, and it's actually the 20th anniversary of the Nobel Prize that was awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. So getting to your question, it's probably one of the most important molecules produced in the human body. It's a signaling molecule, meaning that it helps cells in the body communicate. The number one effect it has is in blood vessel dilation and regulation of blood flow. So when nitric oxide is produced, it dilates blood vessels. You get an increase in oxygen and nutrient delivery. It's responsible for maintenance of blood pressure, blood flow to certain organs, such as during sexual function. It's the main molecule responsible for erections in both men and women. It's a neurotransmitter in the central nervous system, and it's how our immune system fights off infections and pathogens. So it's, again, probably one of the most important molecules produced in the human body.
Wow. Yeah, extremely important. So you seem quite passionate about this molecule. What was your background? How did you get interested in nitric oxide?
Well, I did undergraduate research at the University of Texas at Austin as a biochemistry major, and then I went on to LSU School of Medicine where I was trying to find a research field to get into. And at that time, the Nobel Prize had just been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. There was a lot of excitement, and so I delved right into that and did my PhD dissertation on really the analytical methods to detect nitric oxide gas. And so once we developed these methods, then we really had the tools to really understand nitric oxide biochemistry in a number of different diseases. And so that's what I've done for the past 18, 19 years, is study this molecule, nitric oxide. Now there's 160,000 papers published in the field. Not all those are mine, obviously, but I think we've made some seminal discoveries in the field, and it's resulted in over a dozen issued U.S. and international patents. So we're just now getting a sense of what nitric oxide is, what it does in the body, how the body produces it, what goes wrong in people that can't make nitric oxide, and perhaps most importantly, we're able to fix those production pathways now.
That's exactly what I want to talk about. That's exactly what the show is all about. It's like, hey, what is this? What goes wrong? I mean, obviously you've said it's such an important, vital molecule in the human body, responsible for so many different things. I mean, what happens when we lose the ability to actually produce it?
Well, the first thing that happens is your blood pressure starts to go up. You get poor circulation. But really the first sign and symptom of nitric oxide insufficiency is erectile dysfunction in both men and women, because when you can't regulate blood flow to certain tissues, such as the sex organs, which is mediated by nitric oxide, then you get sexual dysfunction. And I think that's apparent because 50% of the men over the age of 40 report some degree of erectile dysfunction. And then female sexual arousal disorder is a completely other issue in women, but really physiologically it's the inability to generate nitric oxide. So you get high blood pressure, you get sexual dysfunction, you lose insulin signaling, so you get hyperglycemia, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, chronic fatigue because nitric oxide affects mitochondrial ATP production. So really, if you look at what plagues the Western society and the medical system today, it all points to nitric oxide insufficiency. And your body cannot and will not heal until you fix these nitric oxide production pathways.
So let me ask you this question then, clinically, because you mentioned some things, hypertension, obviously there's medications for that. Erectile dysfunction, obviously there's medications for that, and a lot of direct-to-consumer marketing going on. Do you see practitioners clinically actually not going deeper into the root cause, perhaps, and identifying a nitric oxide deficiency in a sense, but just going to more top level, here, take this care when it comes to these resulting clinical conditions?
Yeah, I think that's a major problem with the way medicine's practiced in the U.S. and Western world today, is that you have a diagnosis and then you have to prescribe a medicine for that. And that's how the economic model of medicine works. It's how insurance reimbursement works. And so you don't get to the root cause of disease. You're basically putting a Band-Aid and treating symptoms rather than the root cause. And so here's what I've tried to preach for the last 15, 16 years, is that it's better to be proactive instead of reactive. But medicine is a reactive science. You get sick, then you're reacting to something. But I think the most important thing we can do as a society, and really for the world, is to understand the physiology and biochemistry to the extent that we can prevent disease. And you cannot prevent any disease until you fix nitric oxide. So that's my message. And
or greed. There could be nitric oxide and perhaps greed. That could be a part of it.
Yeah, well, it's big pharma and capitalism and all that rule the world. So, but I think we can't get away from what we do in the basic sciences, and that's to understand disease to the extent that we can not only fix it but prevent it. And nitric oxide has been shown to prevent and really fix a lot of these. And it's not. Right, so
if we're nitric oxide deficient, are there ways that we can improve its production in our bodies?
Yeah, and it's really not rocket science. It's what we've known for hundreds of years. It's diet and exercise. So moderate physical exercise actually can activate this nitric oxide synthase enzyme to regulate blood flow to meet the increased metabolic demand of the skeletal muscles and also on the heart. But also, really, the thing that I focused on in the past probably 10 or 12 years is diet. So we know that green leafy vegetables confer cardioprotective mechanisms, and so the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, dietary approach to stop hypertension. Well, all of these point to a single mechanism, and then they generate nitric oxide gas. And so we figured this out mechanistically, that inorganic nitrate that's found primarily in green leafy vegetables is taken up in the proximal gut and then concentrated in our salivary glands. And then there's nitrate-reducing commensal bacteria that live in the crypts of the tongue. So each time we salivate, these bacteria reduce nitrate to nitrite nitric oxide. And this has been shown to affect systemic blood pressure. We've had several papers now showing that these oral microbiota, or the bacteria that live in the mouth, actually control and regulate blood pressure. So that pathway is very well described. But look, here's the problem. And again, it comes back to pharmacology, because people use antiseptic mouthwash. 185 million Americans wake up every morning and use an antiseptic mouthwash. So they're killing these good bugs that are regulating normal physiological function. Number two, stomach acid is critical for this pathway, and people taking proton pump inhibitors to inhibit stomach acid production. Very bad idea. Your body cannot and will not heal if you can't make stomach acid. And then third, we have this whole hygienic hypothesis. There are bacteria that live on the skin that oxidize ammonia to nitric oxide. So really, we as humans get in our own way of generating nitric oxide. But if you apply the fundamental principles of nitric oxide biology and use diet, lifestyle, and let the body do what it's supposed to do and nurture these good bacteria, then really you can do a lot of good things in terms of health and prevention of disease.
Oh, I think I just want to marry you. I know we're talking about nitric oxide, but I got to tell you, we go back to these simple things, and the things like, as you said, we're sort of getting in our own way, killing off of all of our good bacteria, these things that have meaning and purpose in our everyday lives. So you've been doing this for a long time, 20 years of research in the field. What do you think is the most important thing for people that are watching to know?
Well, I think that's why I always appreciate the opportunity to join groups like you and have really a platform to educate, because really this is the sense of this notion that what you don't know can kill you. And when you don't appreciate the importance of nitric oxide, and I see this all the time in clinical medicine, where these patients have, they're on polypharmacy, 5, 10, 15 different drugs, they're treating symptoms, and nobody can figure them out. And then when you begin to employ these safe and effective nitric oxide strategies to replete these production pathways, all of a sudden they get better. So I have two objectives. Number one is to train physicians and healthcare practitioners to start to recognize nitric oxide deficiency in your patients, and then you can utilize these really natural strategies, diet and lifestyle. But then number two, empower the consumers and the patients to ask their physicians about nitric oxide. And then basically you're forcing them to learn this. But here's what I know. that 160,000 papers in the scientific literature on nitric oxide, 20 years after a Nobel Prize was awarded, and 30 years after its discovery, you can no longer ignore this molecule in medicine. And if you're interested in disease prevention, or if you're sick and want to get healthy, you can't do that without fixing nitric oxide.
Yeah, that's a great message. All right, I have one last question for you. We mentioned diet and lifestyle, and those are foundational things for me as a practitioner with anybody presenting with any clinical presentation.
Right.
What about supplementation? Because I know that some people are like, yeah, diet, I'll get around to that sometime. Lifestyle, oh, those changes are, kind of effortful. What about supplementation?
Well, I think people, we've been conditioned to look for a silver bullet. People don't want to change their lifestyle, change their diet. They want to take a pill. And there is no such thing as a silver bullet. But here's what I say about diet and lifestyle are always first line of defense. But here's the challenge, and we figured this, we published on this several years ago, that all vegetables aren't created equal. Because of the changes in farming practices and GMO vegetables and the herbicides and things. So a lot of the foods we eat are depleted in essential nutrients, and there's really no standardization of that anymore. So you have to look for things that are standardized in terms of what they are. So just taking a beetroot extract off the shelf at Whole Foods or some retail outlet doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a nitric oxide benefit for it, because we use those as placebos in our clinical trials. Mm-hmm. So just because it's beets doesn't necessarily mean it's going to give you an effect. And the same thing with a lot of green food products too. It's creative marketing rather than real science. So the challenge for consumers is, and to answer your question, I think supplementation is very important because it's simple. And my philosophy is chronic disease occurs from two reasons and two reasons only. Number one, your body's missing something that it needs, or number two, your body's exposed to something that doesn't need, like a toxin or infection. So if you get rid of the toxins and replete what the body's missing, the body heals itself. And you can only do that through proper supplementation.
Yeah. Dr. Nathan Bryan, thank you so much for your time. Folks, get your patients to eat their greens and then some. All right, that's what's happening this time in Healthy Happenings. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Holly.